chaotic season Andy Enfield's last year at USC. Trojans go 15-18 after a few tournament appearances in a row. Another program that was pretty chaotic last year, Arkansas, after, making, was it 3 straight Elite Eights? Eric Musselman, there's just injuries, there's drama, there's people leaving the team, there's crazy rumors that I think were completely BS. But the whole point is it was not a good thing for Arkansas last year. But guess what? USC now has Andy Enfield. I'm you know what? I need to do this intro over again. I just stumbled so much. Give me a second. I'm sorry, Connor.
No worries. That happens to me. So I've been there. No problem.
All right. I'm going to run it back. All right. 3, 2. USC was super chaotic last year. Bronny James, injuries, ends up going 15-18. Andy Enfield bolts for SMU. In comes Eric Musselman, who dealt with plenty of chaos after some very successful seasons at Arkansas. He comes to USC, and already he's doing the Musselman thing. This could be a team that starts everyone over the size of 6'6". It's all transfers and some enticing upside in USC's first year in the Big Ten. Christian Nick here with Connor Morrissette, USC expert. Connor, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us about how everything transpired from Andy leaving to Musselman coming and this roster coming together.
Yeah, well, I remember it was the worst kept secret that Andy Enfield was going to leave. He was telling everyone, I'll make my final decision on Monday after the previous week. Rumors had come out that he was going to SMU. It was tough to confirm anything on the USC side that he was leaving, but people on the SMU side were like, he is coming. And when you put that all together, it was pretty clear that he was going to. So he leaves on that Monday, and then a few weeks or either a month, however long goes by, Eric Musselman comes in. USC loses pretty much everyone from its previous team who was eligible to come back, except for Harrison Hornery. He's the one returner this year. And Musselman and his team, his assistant coaches, they rented a house in Manhattan Beach out here. They called it Portal House, and they researched and recruited and worked really, really hard to fill the holes on the roster. And they've brought in a bunch of players who will all see roles this year. They have a couple of freshmen who one followed, or both of them actually followed from Arkansas. So they put this roster together. Musselman all offseason has said, I don't know if we have any stars, but we're going to play really hard and see what it looks like. So I think they do lack some star power, but they have a lot of really experienced players, and who knows what it's going to look like. I'm excited to see how it all comes together, though. That's for sure.
Before we even dive into the personnel, I want to ask you this because you just brought up the star power thing. And I feel like at Arkansas, the last few years, and getting the star players, like you obviously create a big ceiling. But, man, when the floor caved in like it did last season, it got ugly quick. And I love this roster, honestly. I mean, it's 8 out of the top 10 players are grad guys. Like, I know teams are older than they ever are this season, but that alone is insane. I guess my main question is from that is, like, you're bringing in old guys who are going to want to play. They're going to want to win. So I think it's going to be tough on Musselman to really manage expectations and figure out the minutes and the roles and everything. So how do you think it's best for him to approach that and deal with that this season with these guys?
I think the best way to do it is to play whoever earns it in practice and not make any promises. And it seems like that's what they've done. Everyone has to earn everything. I can see a starting 5 come together, and I expect them to ride those guys pretty hard going into this season, where you have Josh Cohen, who came over from UMass. He initially committed to Arkansas, and he's pretty firmly looks like the starting center. Chibuzo Agbo was good at Boise State, started his career at Texas Tech. He looks like a forward who's going to play for him. Terrence Williams was at Michigan. He's a really good three-point shooter. It looks like he'll play for him. Desmond Claude from Xavier, the most improved player of the year in the Big East. It looks like he's settled in at point guard. And then at the 2-guard spot, they have a few other options, but I imagine they'll end up going big and play St. Thomas, who can do just about everything. He's probably not a 2-guard. He's 6'7", but he could play anywhere from 2 to 4. And that's kind of the beauty of the roster, where you have him, you have guys like Matt Noling and some of the players I mentioned earlier. It's sort of positionless. So to answer your initial question, I think no promises were made, but I feel like they do have a starting 5 in mind. And then guys were recruited. That staff does a good job of explaining, like, we expect your role to be this. And if you overachieve and do better than we expect, certainly you're going to play more. But like Clark Slatcher, who was in the Ivy League, he's coming to USC. I think the expectation for him is to play, of course, but he knows he's not going to be a starting guard on this team most likely. He's probably that backup point guard, a guy who is a really good 3-point shooter who comes off the bench, and recruiting guys like that who understand their role before they set foot on campus is helpful. And I think the staff has done a good job of that.
It's interesting the role awareness that you speak of, because at Arkansas that was definitely something in terms of like false promises or just guys being unhappy. Like a guy like Chris Likes comes from Miami, who was averaging 20 a game or whatever, and he's just not a thing. And Caleb Battle comes, he was very sought after at Gonzaga now, and there were games where he didn't play. There was a lot of weird stuff last year with that, and I think Nick makes a good point about the maturity of all the grad transfers, but there's also 10 dudes on this team that averaged like at least 12 points a game in college basketball last year. Like these are guys that can put the ball in the cup, and that was a cool story about the Portal House and stuff. And they definitely got guys. They brought in the guys. And I think when you mentioned the star power, I'm going to push back on this. Maybe I'm just super high on Des Claude, but I think the vision of Musselman is that Des Claude is a guy that is, in the mold of these guys that he loves, whether it's the Martin twins, Jordan Caroline, Stanley Mude, Moses Moody, Traymon Mark, what he tried to do with him last year, of these 6'6" athletes that can play make and usually can't really shoot that well, but like have a mid-range game and can set guys up. And he just got a really good track record with guys like that. And I think he sees Des Claude as, I see that 24% 3-point percentage, but let's get that to 29, 30 and let you just go. And St. Thomas, another guy that could be in that mold. And I mean, it's just enticing looking at a roster where Des Claude's your point guard as like a 6'6" wing. So I think there's a lot of fun things they can do. But if you had to guess, is Des Claude, St. Thomas, Agbo, is that the three guys leading the way from a scoring perspective?
I think so. And then I just, with Terrence Williams, he shot it so well at Michigan. I know Michigan wasn't great, but in my head, when people ask me about the team, like I keep coming back to him, and I've watched a couple practices. He looks really solid. So I think he has a chance to contribute, and he's another one of those forwards who can play anywhere from the 2 to the 4. So I look at him in there as well. And then Rashawn A.G. from Bowling Green is probably the backup center, but there's a chance that he has had such a good offseason that he can overtake Josh Cohen and start for this team. He's someone who, at the beginning when they first started practicing, Musselman would stop the practices and I wouldn't say yell at him, but would teach AG. He had a steep learning curve. And then the other week they're practicing and he stops practice and he makes sure the media all hears a Musselman and he goes, Rashawn, you've been the most improved player we've had so far this season. And that to me makes me think he's going to play a lot. And he's another guy who I think they'll rely on for scoring, probably not as much, but the guys you mentioned, Christian, yeah, they'll be the scorers, but look for AG to play a lot too.
The starting lineup you named earlier is huge. And Chris said it too: 6'6", 6'7", 6'7", 6'7", and 6'10". I mean, just insane. And I don't know how much you know about booty ball. And I know Chris loves booty ball. Michael Shrewsbury used to do it at Penn State. But with like St. Thomas, who's very versatile, Desmond Cloud, who's very versatile. And I don't want to bring up, game by game. So we're not talking about game by game, but like game one for Chattanooga, they have 2 point guards who are 5'10" and 6 foot. Like, it seems silly to not play in the post out of these guys. Do you think that offense this season will feature some of that booty ball?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guys are huge, so that would make a lot of sense. And they also have the ability, if they need to match up with a smaller team for whatever reason, if the booty ball isn't working, that they can go to some of that with a Bryce Pope, with a Clark Slatchert. So I do think the roster is versatile, and I wonder, like in an ideal world, is St. Thomas going to the NBA and is Desmond Cloud going to the NBA after this season? That's what they see right now. That's their hope. That's their dream. And Musselman, his track record says that he can get those guys to the NBA, but I do think we're going to see them be utilized in a lot of different ways. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are times where Claude isn't handling the ball exclusively and USC tries to have him play it like a 2 or a 3 and just use his creativity on offense and his versatility on defense. And maybe he's a guy who's consistently backing people down if he doesn't start with the ball in his hands on a possession. So, yeah, I think we'll see a little bit of that. I know for sure they're going to play really, really fast because that's all Musselman's talked about all offseason. And as the season begins, we'll kind of get into what exactly it all looks like. I think their first exhibition game is next week, and then they play Gonzaga later this month. So I'll get a chance to watch those games, and we'll get a better understanding of what they're going to do. But, yeah, I think absolutely with the size that they have, they could be in positions where a lot of these guards are backing people down just because they're so much bigger than everyone else.
Right. It's going to be mismatch city. And just going over Musselman's coaching resume really quick. So both at Nevada and Arkansas, he misses the tournament his first year, but had 20-win seasons, and then makes the tournament 3 straight years in Nevada, and then obviously 3 straight years with second weekend appearances at Arkansas before last year's just absolute just bad, just train wreck season. And something that's so interesting about him is I love a basketball coach that can adapt to their personnel and sometimes we're an offensive-minded team, sometimes we're a defensive-minded team. Brad Underwood comes to mind as another guy that can do this, but at Nevada, this was a team that this 2018 Nevada team that made the Sweet 16 was a top 10 offense and outside the top 100 defense, was number 1 in the country at taking care of the basketball. And then you fast forward to Arkansas, and he has 10th best defense, 11th best defense, and 17th best defense 3 straight years before last year was just that team had the talent to be good defensively, but they were just a mess, and they were 133rd. So do you see this team being one that's more offensive or defensive? Do you think they'll hang their hat on a certain end of the floor there? And who I guess are the key pieces to that defense being good? Because the front court is where there are a little bit more questions, just because you could be starting a guy who wasn't a high major player last year.
If I had to guess, I'd say they're going to hang their hat defensively, and it's all because of that length. But yeah, the front court, like Josh Cohen, he 7-footer, he can shoot the 3. He is your rim protector, and then if he goes out, like Rashawn AG is beefy, but he's a little bit shorter. I don't know how great he'll be as a power 5 or power 6 rim protector. And then Harrison Hornery, to me, if you're relying on him, you're probably not as good as you'd hope to be. So definitely some questions there, but I think they're going to hang their hat on the defensive end with all that length. Like their point guard, Claude, is like 6'6", like it's going to be really tough for teams to move the ball around these guys, and just that positionless style that Musselman wants to run. Yes, there are front court questions, but I think anywhere from the 1 to the 4, like Jalen Shelley's a guy we haven't even talked about. He's a true freshman. Musselman has said a lot of great things about Shelley. He'll probably come off the bench, but he can truly play point guard 2, 3, or 4. And there's a lot of guys on this roster who can do that too. I'd throw Claude in there. Williams can handle the ball. St. Thomas could be in that mold too. So when you can throw so many of those bigger players at teams, I think they have to hang their hat defensively. And the hope is in the non-conference, your defense just starts out pretty good, and then it's not that hard. You can figure out the offense as it goes, because I do think this team is going to have some trouble scoring the ball as the season goes on. But defensively, if they play at the level they're capable of with that size, they should be in a lot of these games, and then it's just all about execution at the end.
I have 2 questions. My first question is Kevin Patton Jr. I have him circled as a sophomore that can really break out this season. I don't think we'll see him break out as much just because of the guys in front of him who are just older right now. But I mean, this is a guy coming over from San Diego, and you've never watched him play. He's highly athletic, average 10 a game, 5 boards, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. So he kind of does everything. He's very versatile. What can we expect his role to look like this season?
So unfortunately with Kevin, he is hurt, and he's going to miss like 2 or 3 months. I think he injured his hip, and that's just a tough blow, because he was another one of those guys with his size that you could kind of throw in there, and his athleticism is very, very impressive. So I think we'll probably see him at the tail end of the year, but you worry with the guy who's transferring in, like, and he misses so much time. Is it just going to be too late for him to develop a role? But we'll see. That's one of the beauties of college sports. Like, there's so many unknowns, and we'll see. He certainly could break in later. But, yeah, I don't expect him to do much to begin the year just because he won't be available.
That's one good thing about having roster depth is, like, obviously it sucks to see him not play, but, hey, you're not really going to sweat it that much. And then my second question was back to Josh Cohen real quick. This was a guy that from St. Francis to UMass, I had question marks about going into the A-10 and being productive. And, I mean, he blew me away, honestly. I mean, he ranked in the 98th percentile at UMass in the post, scoring at 1.3.1 points per possession. And now he's going from UMass A-10 to the Big Ten with USC. I mean, should I still have some concerns there? Just because, like, can he replicate that same success in the Big Ten where it's so post-dominant and there are so many good bigs around that conference?
I think that's a totally fair question. I will say Musselman said that Cohen's in the best shape of his life. And at the beginning when he came over and they would run those practices, that would be crazy. Cohen and AG were 2 guys who, hands on their head, they would be gassed pretty consistently. But now he's moving really well. So I want to have a take here and say one way or the other. I don't know what it's going to look like, because it's one thing to take that step up to play at UMass, but it's a totally different beast now in the Big Ten. I guess it's good that they don't have to go up against Zach Edey, but there are a lot of really good big men in this conference. And that's a big question that I have on this team, because I think you can be pretty confident in Claude because of his track record and transferring from Xavier to USC. That should translate. And Agbo's had some success. Cohen, I think, is excuse me, one of the bigger question marks, because like they're going to ask him to do a lot. And I think if his role was smaller, I would say for sure he could be a success. But what they're going to ask him to do, can he play that perfectly? I hope so. And they're hoping so too. But right now, I'd say I don't really know, because it is a big step. And I have the same questions that you do, Nick.
Something that stands out to me is, only average half a block a game. Arkansas, Musselman's always been the top 100 in block percentage. Defensively, they were all the way up at 8th. Last year, a lot of that was, gambling. That's why they were so bad defensively. But anyways, what gives me confidence, though, is even if Cohen isn't, doesn't super translate, if he's solid, like he doesn't, if his production drops and everything, like we talk about Musselman's positionless basketball. There were plenty of times at Arkansas and Nevada where he didn't have a 5-man out there, and it didn't matter because of all the mismatches they were causing the other end of the floor, and the guys just played hard and were well coached defensively. They made it work. So I think that's something, a luxury that shows how good of a coach he is. There's a lot of teams where you're like, oh, if this one big man doesn't pan out, it's like they're kind of screwed. Like they're not going to be able to stop people on the inside. But I said Arkansas. USC is a team that I'm confident that whether Cohen's good or not, that they're gonna he'll find a way to make it work on the defensive end. You bring in 2 Ivy League transfers, which is interesting. 2 grad transfers. Clark, I'm going to butcher this, Slagert and Matt Noling from Penn and Yale, respectively. Do you expect them to – they were both productive. Yale obviously won a game in the tournament last year. Do you expect them to contribute? I assume that they know with all this high major talent that they're definitely bench guys, but, what have you been hearing about them?
Definite bench guys. Slatcher will be the backup point guard. So if Claude, for whatever reason, isn't out there, expect to see Slatcher. And he's such a good three-point shooter that he could even play with Claude at times. And then Noling, you mentioned, Christian, the fact that Musselman sometimes doesn't have a center. Noling at 6'6", I don't want to compare him to Draymond Green, but like he can be that 6'6" center for them when Cohen isn't available or he's not playing well or AG's in foul trouble, and maybe he gives you a better matchup than Harrison Hornery does. To me, he was brought in to do some of the dirty work that we saw him do at Yale. And I think that's a role that, like, I feel more confident about him filling his role because he's just not asked to do as much. Like, I love that he could come in, be that change of pace guy, give him a few possessions as a 5 when Musselman is just doing something totally different than what we see most teams do. So that's sort of how I see their 2 roles. Noling, Musselman said, could be the president of the United States one day. Like they're really high on him, and he's a great leader too. So they really love what they've seen from him. Expect him to come in, and I think he'll, even though he's undersized, play that 4 and even play that 5 sometimes. Not a great 3-point shooter. His role is pretty clearly defined, in my opinion, as a bench guy who's going to come in, and if the big guys aren't getting it done for USC, he'll give them a different look.
Yeah, I honestly love your role allocation outlook, because, and like me and Chris did the St. John's pod on Friday, and we were talking about how Patino had, like, they had 2 Ivy League guys, Chris Ledlum and Jordan Dingle, both fine players, but they were starters and they were asked to do so much, and it didn't translate. But when you bring in 2 older Ivy League players who are good and they're coming off the bench, and Matt Nolan and Clark, like, that is huge and that is massive. And back to Clark, my one thing is, like, say Desmond Claude or St. Thomas or whoever starting just, is having some turnover issues. Like, you're bringing in a true point guard in Clark who's old off the bench. And, like, that, in my opinion, is just massive. Like, that is a huge addition.
Yeah, that's why I think the floor for this team is a little bit higher than some people think. There are some people like you guys who like the roster and think they'll be competitive. And then there are other people who have them at the bottom of the Big Ten, which I understand. They're a new team. There are so many question marks. But the fact that all these guys are old, most of them, and they have had success at their prior stops. Like, there's a world where USC maybe doesn't win the Big Ten. I don't want to say that, but like, they're going to be a tough team to play, I think. So that to me makes me feel pretty good about them. I don't know how high their ceiling is, but I feel pretty good that their floor is like probably a lower to middle of the Big Ten team. And in a league where a lot of teams are really good, like, that still could be good enough to get into the tournament. So we'll see.
Absolutely.
I mean, people love having a short-term memory. Like, Eric Musselman was one of the hottest coaches in the country. Like, they had a train wreck year. I think they got a little cocky, him and his staff, of, we can bring in anybody. We're gonna make it work. Like we just do it. Like, oh, give me all these freshmen, give me all these transfers. We'll make it work. And it didn't. And it spiraled. And it got worse and worse. And that's okay. Like this dude didn't forget how to coach. And I think, it's a little humbling, or it's a little bit of a reset. And I think they were a bit more strategic about how they got guys in. But we know the way he wants to win, and he's done it. Like I think people projecting USC to be at the bottom of the Big Ten are discounting him as a coach. And also, like you said, even if they're not super good, like they're going to be tough to play because of just the complexion of the roster. Is something that I like to add. And then one guy who I feel like we didn't spend enough time on is Agbo. I've been like, people know on Twitter that I'm kind of a Boise State hater. I've always kind of just like disliked the way they play, but Agbo was the one guy I'm like, I like that guy though, because he's just really solid. Dead eye. If he's open from three, I expect him to make it. He's got good size. He can defend and he can put the ball on the floor. I think he is a fantastic piece of this. And what was the one other thing I wanted to say? Oh, St. Thomas comes from Northern Colorado, which is where Dalton Connect come. There's something in the water there. These guys just become stars out of nowhere. St. Thomas played 2 years at Loyola Chicago and like didn't see the floor. I don't know if he struggled with injuries or anything, but he was a monster at Northern. He was putting up ridiculous numbers. Like, and maybe it's just because Connect was just at that school, and I understand they're different types of players. And I'm not saying St. Thomas is gonna, be on the Lakers and be a steal, not going in the lottery a year from now, but point I'm getting at is that production's real in that league. Like we've seen guys do it, not just Connect. So you're not that productive, and then you just go and you can't make an impact at the high metro level, especially with his frame and his skill level and his athleticism. So bottom line is I'm high on these rosters. It's a fun team, and Musselman can coach his ass off. Like, let's not forget, because they had one bad year. So
yeah, and the thing about last year, the whole staff has said, like, we learned lessons. We took transfers from programs that we didn't think very much of those coaches, and those transfers burned us. And I think they took a transfer from Louisville with Kenny Payne and from Memphis with Penny Ardo. I don't think they thought very much of those guys. And so they said, we have programs where we will not take transfers from because of last season. So they learned some lessons. They approached it totally differently here at USC, and we'll see what the results are. But the chemistry, that has something that does stand out to me. I do think it's a good group in that regard, and I don't think at Arkansas they were anywhere close to that last year, which probably played into their troubled season.
Awesome, man. Well, USC flying a little under the radar. I know the Pac-12 is dead, but some of these West Coast teams I feel like just can kind of creep up on people, and don't be surprised if USC is a team that just keeps getting better, and all of a sudden you look up and they're red hot in February, and they're a team nobody wants to play, because Arkansas is also a team that's always started slow in conference play, and then all of a sudden it's like this team is legit. So thank you so much for joining us, Connor. You're a great guest, and I know it's still football mode at USC, but as hoops guys, we're thinking about Des Claude and Musselman right now. So appreciate you, and hope you enjoy the rest of football season and basketball season.
Thanks, guys.